All right, so now we're moving into truly where the rubber meets the road is in phase G, implementation governance. And one could say, well, how is rubber meeting the road here when we're just governing? Well, actually, this is where the work is getting done. We did planning in phases A through F, but now we're overseeing the implementation to see if in fact that planning leads to anything. It's very important to us that the vision be realized. Now, we don't control that as architects. We depend on implementation teams, software engineers, systems engineers. They're the ones doing phase G. We are in a governance role. We're in an oversight role. But we're the ones who know, we know what's needed, and we need to do architecture contracts to help govern this. So anyway, this is a completely different shift from the planning to the governance role, and governance in particular of the implementation projects. So our objective is to ensure conformance with the target architecture by the implementation projects. I've had some people say, well, we do that, we do those too. Okay, but we're like taking off, if we're putting on, if the engineers, we're putting on our engineering hat, and then you say, now I'm putting on my governance hat, right? So, but here we're talking about the governance hat that you're wearing, ensuring conformance with the target architecture by implementation projects. That's our main objective. And to support that, we perform appropriate architecture governance functions. And we're doing that for the solutions that are being worked in phase G, which might take a long time. It just depends on the scenario, and especially on something complex like next generation hotel or something. It's not like you just snap your fingers and you have everything sorted out. So there's a lot of moving parts in phase G, things moving over time. And you're trying to bring your expertise to say, how does one work package or project tie with another? And in the planning phase, as well as in this engineering phase, as well as in the operating. So a lot of coordination has to occur here, and that's why we're involved as experts. But not just for the solution, but also tied to any change requests that might be appropriate based on what we're learning through our governance role. So just to hit that again, we have to ensure conformance with the target architecture by implementation projects. We have communication with them. We have architecture contracts that explain our role, and we see what they're trying to do so we can oversee that with, for example, compliance reviews. And in those compliance reviews, we may need to do some change requests to make sure that the vision that we had in mind is in fact going to be realized, or perhaps we need to rethink the whole thing. We move into H. Now this is overarching change management, but also right now in TOGAF it has other responsibilities besides change management. It's ensuring that the whole architecture life cycle is maintained. So you think of H as like it's hooking it all together. It's hovering above all the other circles there, all the other phases. But it's also hooking to the outside world to say what are best practices, what would differentiate us, what's happening with new technology, with new business trends, new business models. So H is really like a center of excellence type of a phase. So it's very important to also say, again, based on what we learned from the last cycle, how are we going to do the next cycle? So there's that continuity that's so important there. Some EA practices using no framework or using another framework, they stop their EA work in essentially the definition part. Like in TOGAF, that would be like phase D. They finish and they move on and do more modeling for another change initiative. But TOGAF has you working all the way through in a continuous fashion, and that's what H is doing. It's kind of the engine there to make that happen. And as part of that, it's running governance. It's executing the architecture governance framework. And what we mean by that are all the use cases for governance. That could be not just for compliance reviews, but also for overall alignment, for contract management, for setting up board meetings, for providing waivers, for deciding, do you need to do another phase A? So it's supporting all the use cases that involve decision making, really, about the architecture work. So that's a very important role that's not captured in the title of architecture change management, but ensuring that the architecture governance framework and all the associated use cases, information and workflow and repository aspects are supported in that process. The overall as well on H there is that we are trying to make sure that the EA is realizing value. So we're also making sure that the architecture is fit for purpose. So it could be an associated dashboard that you could create to say, how are we doing now versus what was expected, and what do we need to do to continuously improve. So that would be a third major objective of phase H, is value realization. Requirements management then it's a circle in the middle of the ADM. We often think of it as more than just requirements, because it's capturing gaps, it's capturing concerns, but fundamentally it's architecture requirements that we're managing. We're not managing the implementation project requirements. Those requirements are managed by the project teams for those particular efforts. For example, with smartphone for hotel key, there would be people working on the whole messaging protocols for the different locking mechanisms, for the different types of smartphones and so forth. Those would be engineering efforts. They would have their own requirements. These requirements, when we talk about requirements management, we're talking about the architecture requirements to get us to our vision, and what planning is required to do that in terms of gaps and in terms of ways to fill those gaps. So requirements management ensures that this requirements management process is sustained and operates for all the relevant ADM phases for any particular change initiative. So all phases in the ADM, all the other 9 phases are connected to requirements management. So even preliminary phase, we would say, well, what are the architecture requirements to have an EA capability at all? And are those requirements changing? Do we need to change our skills, and so on? Our skills, our tools, our principles to be more effective in doing future phase A's. So every phase is linked to the requirements management phase. Okay, now we've finished the objectives, and we'll move forward to discuss other key elements of the ADM.